think we should start by everybody has to say something. So did anybody, you guys, were you at the theme classes or were you away?
I was here for an hour and then
And what did you think?
I thought it was very interesting, especially the improvising part. I learned quite a lot from it because my improvising skills are not that good.
So did it light a kind of a fire under you maybe?
Yeah, I just improved my skills a little bit.
Cool.
That's good.
And the rest of you?
We were at the morning classes.
So,
It was fun.
so what would you like to ask? I mean, I guess we're sort of at the place where this isn't a television show. Entertainers here. So,
I can go ahead first. In the morning, we kind of worked on improvising based on the melody, and then we did some rhythm with our bodies. But I wonder if there's a moment where you had like a very strong sense of rhythmic pattern going on first before you had a melody in mind when you do your compositions.
who are you asking?
Just in general.
Definitely. Sometimes I'm awakened at night by some really loud car driving by with a, I don't know what you call it. You know when cars have really loud stuff? Music. Boombox. Kind of thing. And that started a whole movement of piece of mine because I wanted something very violent, which is, there's something violent about being taken out of sleep into this kind of terrifying rhythm.
What's the title of the piece?
It's the third movement of a piece called Concerto for Chamber Orchestra. And that movement is called Tears, like boo-boo. Tears, like tear. Tears, tears. Anyway, so yeah, or sometimes a certain nonsense. A few words will come to me that suggest a rhythmic idea before it's melodic.
You want to go? Go in order.
Yes, Joe. I think, for me, rhythm's a really interesting thing as far as bringing structure to a piece. And when I was working with, my grandfather singing traditional songs, I was recording some of them in my studio. And one time he came and he forgot his drum. And I was like, oh, well, that's okay. And he said, no, I can't sing without my drum. And so I had to wire up one of my MIDI pads to create a drum sound and put the headphones on. He was sitting there because he had to have that rhythm and that pulse, yeah. And I think it's a really sometimes underappreciated how important the rhythm is and how distinctive it is. I was watching a documentary about film composers, and somebody brought up a point about John Williams themes that people know. That are these earworms, like the theme to Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
But he's like, there's these rhythms where if you hear it, you know what it is without the tones, and it's like you should really strive for, And so, I have definitely taken things where I've come up with the rhythm first because I wanted to create something that rhythmically was interesting, and the melodic material came second. So.
Or sharp.
Oh.
You know that shark is going to jump at you. And how important silence is in that theme. Because silence brings the suspended quality of fear, right? It's like you don't know what is about to happen. You don't know where the next attack, the next sound is going to come. You just become in this state. You get into this state of being very attentive and fearful. And I think rhythm does a lot of that. It induces states in us and emotions. So to me, rhythm is absolutely important. Even if it's something that is not rhythmical. Like, I remember one of the pieces that I have is for Lily. It was inspired by that character of the Danish girl. Have you seen that movie? The Danish girl, about the Danish painter who is a transsexual, early 20th century, right? So I was very moved by this character, and especially by the condition of not, it's like you don't recognize yourself in your own body. So I wanted this lingering and this very fragile quality of the gesture, and the melody just kind of came from the rhythm of this gesture, just this. So.
What's the title of that piece?
Para Lili.
Para
Para Lili. L-I-L-I. Para Lili. Para Lili. It's a slow waltz.
I love hearing about all that, how the composition came to be, and what composition come to your mind when you're talking about compositional technique like this.
Who would like to ask another question? Yeah.
So when talking about like the process of composing a piece, right? As I don't understand that much from composition, I don't have like that talent. What is it related to? Is it something related to the muse that you're waiting for to come, and then you start composing, or you start sit down and start to figure something out?
That's an excellent question. And from my experience, it's like my experience, right? As a lady composer. Every work, every new piece is like a child. They have their own personalities, they have their own inner logic, their own inner wishes. So some of them are born grown up, like, you know, like in 2 days you compose something, right? And others take years until you polish. It needs polishing, it needs thinking over again until you find the right balance, which the guys talked so much about this morning, right? Balance is important, to find the formal balance and the right temporality of the piece. So it depends. So yes, I start from scratch, from an idea, right? That I hear usually in my head, or a poetic idea, like the Anita piece I was talking yesterday. That's an opera scene, right? That Anita is fleeing the army. So that's for string orchestra. So I want the cello to imitate the horses. And there's just the other strings, viola, timbales. Right? It's just kind of terror of fleeing, because you were just a small group of rebels. You were fleeing the 3 most well-equipped armies in the 19th century. So it's a terrifying experience, right? So that's my experience. I don't know what's yours. That was.
I'm, you know, I wish that I was a person that could just like flip the switch and just start writing music, but it's never worked that way for me. I think everybody's different. But there's certainly times when I feel stuck, or I feel just like there's like a block, you know? But something I learned is, I talked a little bit about weaving in this morning's session, and I was talking to a weaver, and she told me a story about finding inspiration. It was just kind of sitting and observing and listening, and you know, there's so much all around us. And you know, she just sat outside, and like the wind blew like it was like a cardboard box, like flew across. She's like, oh, that'll be my rug. It was this pattern of rotating squares, you know, which if you look at the rug, you're not going to think, oh, there's a box, you know. But you know, if you're receptive to the things that are around us that can take so many different forms, You know, so when I'm feeling stuck, which I often do, I just have to realize that I'm not tuning into the things that are around me that can be inspiring. So
that's like the muse. When you see something, it's the muse or inspiration. That's what motivates.
it could be that, or you know, sometimes you know, if I'm commissioned to write something, they want something very specific. So I have to find the inspiration in what it is that they want and combine with what can I do. You know, it's not.
Yeah.
Not every commission is something that it starts from, you know, what I want to do. It's someone else's, you know, wanting me to create something along their lines, so that I have to figure out where does that intersect with my, you know, compositional style. So.
Question, so do you ever have difficulty translating an image or inspiration you had onto the actual composition?
Yeah. I think I said, you know, for me, like trial and error, you know, sometimes if something doesn't feel right, then I know it's like not the right direction, I have to try something else. Sometimes I'll write the whole piece and then it's just not right, you know, I have to start over. I think it's that way with a lot of things, you know, even before I was composing, you know, and, you know, getting an idea of how I want to shape a piece that someone else wrote. And it works in little sections, and I put it all together, and it just doesn't have the right flow. It doesn't have the right, you know, linear path that maybe it needs, and I have to like kind of deconstruct the habits I built in through my practice and start again. You know, when something didn't feel right. There's a lot of instinct. I mean, that's what we do as artists and creators and performers. We have to rely a lot on instinct, and I think. It's interesting because in these classes, it's so analytical. We break things down and it's like all the moving parts, and we can look at Beethoven, oh, he did this, it was, you know, thematic transformation and fragmentation and blah, blah, blah. But I believe a lot of things were just instinct. Like, yeah, they studied those things, you know, I studied those things, but I did an interview once on radio and somebody was asking me about one of my pieces, and they're like, oh, and the middle section was really interesting how you did this, you know, fragmentation of the melody, and then used that, and I was like, oh. I did, didn't I? Because for me, it was like I know I need to get from point A to point B, and it's like instinct. And you know, my instinct, not that I didn't know what fragmentation or augmented rhythm or anything was, but you know, sometimes you have to get away from that analytical part to, you know, see the bigger picture.
I'd like to jump back to inspiration, because I didn't say anything about that. I think it's a really good question about the muse. And the muse, I think, is overrated. The idea of the romanticism of these things that just come to us. It's wonderful when they do, but we can't, I only speak for myself, I can't rely on that, this glow of inspiration to be there all the time. I don't always feel like going to work. Do you? I mean, you know, won't you do anything you can? Oh, I'll just watch this YouTube thing for 15 more minutes, and then 4 hours have passed. Hello, we all know this, right? That I could have been composing. But if you go back to Greek mythology, the muses, they're like, I think there's 7 of them. They're tricksters. Sometimes they don't come down the mountain, Olympus, to greet the composer or the poet. So what are you going to do then? You don't just sit there and wait. You get to work, and I promise you that if you work, inspiration can come out of work.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you're in the sound world, or your fingers feel good on a certain chord or something, and it will trigger all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But it's not like in the movie. For me, it's not like it is in the movies. Although I certainly take inspiration from the same things my colleagues are talking about, you know, whether it's nature imagery or the weather or whatever, you know. But it's a tremendous amount of work, like any art. There's a huge amount of work and craft, but inspiration the muse will appear if you work.
Yeah, and we don't realize, and we are not used to labeling, just mulling over, just thinking about something for hours, days, and months as work. We don't usually label that as work, but thinking about something for a very long time is work.
And my teacher at Juilliard, Roger Sessions, was a very wise man. I was stuck on a certain piano piece I was writing, and I just couldn't he said, I could suggest a couple of things, but I'm not going to. I want you to figure it out for yourself. And I was on the #1 train, with 5,000 other people, and I jumped into the car, and it just dawned on me how to get from A to B. That was the big problem. And I remember when I told him that the next lesson, he just grinned, like, that shows that your subconscious is at work.
It's,
We're always working on a piece, even when we're not working
Yeah.
on it.
I dream. When I have a compositional problem or an interpretation problem, I dream about it. Sometimes for days until bling. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night just to write down the solution. Yeah, because my brain kept working on it. And I always carry with me a notebook, especially for lyrics for songs. I work very hard sometimes through a period of months. For this theater piece, I have been working on the theme song since last January, that I started to write the lyrics, and now I have the first version of it, lyrics and music, but since January, 6 months. Phew.
So when we play works by Schubert or Schumann or whatever, the old composers, I think we always teachers always talk about you need to understand what their life was like and all the historical context. So are any of you I guess conscious of kind of documenting as much as you can in case someone 100 years later wants to play your music and be just understand as much as they can about it?
That's a great question. Have you guys thought about it? Go ahead.
It makes me uneasy to think about it because you're thinking about your own mortality. But I'll bet we all have been picked apart by either critics or people writing dissertations. And that's a weird feeling. I think 6 or 7 people have written things about my music, and I'm happy to help them out because I'm the only one that can answer certain questions. But I think you're wise to look at these people in the past and put together what was their world like. It only helps the playing, but I don't think it's my primary job as a composer to feed the universe information about me, except the notes. So other people can figure that part out.
I think for me, along that line, it's not really. Someone else needs to understand it because I don't even understand myself.
That's great.
But when I'm working with social media and things like Instagram or TikToks, I do try to not just do, if I'm doing TikTok videos, just my music. There's just stuff in my normal life that people are interested in seeing. And so I think in the age that we live, there's this digital footprint that we can look through and see. Not just me and my music, but with other things that I'm doing and other interactions that I have or other projects that I'm working on or passions or whatever. And I try to be better about that because it's very, we have such a voyeuristic society that wants to see these things, and it gets, you're exposing yourself. You go on TikTok, you see people crying and hysterics. That's got the views. You know what I mean? People want that kind of stuff, and it's not easy to put yourself out there. But like I said, it's also people. I don't know how they view me as a person or things that I might not think are important about me. Maybe they do, or vice versa. So, yeah, I think that just this social media stuff is my putting those things out there, and then what happens with it, I don't know. But it's pieces of me.
I like that. Pieces of me. That's really a great title for a piece.
You can have that.
We can share. We can compose together. I'm different from Ken, for instance, because I'm not afraid of my mortality. Actually, I have the #1 item on my bucket list. Is to just sit in front of a camera and record for my son what my life was like, and leave it for him when I die. So he's going to be able to understand a lot of the things we went through as a family, a lot about my background. We talk a lot about it, but There is also information about my political views, my musical views, what is being Latina, mixed color person, you know. And I find that quite empowering that you have your own narrative. You understand what your life was about. For me, it's about learning. The only purpose I'm here on this earth is to learn as much as possible. That's all. That's all that matters.
And it's a lot easier nowadays, right, to document information.
Hmm?
Because like nowadays, a lot easier to document, like, you know, just to record information.
Yeah.
Because, like 200 years ago, you know, someone would just say something nonsense about Schubert. that
It's on a
doesn't
pen
have
drive,
anything
right?
to-
It's in a
So-
pen drive.
I think you said, is there an artistic standard?
Yeah,
Is that the word you used?
yeah.
There may be, but I don't think there could be a universal consensus on it. I mean, you mentioned the Baroque era, which is interesting, because I'll bet you anything there were women writing music in the Baroque era.
Oh, Barbara Streisand
I mean,
was the
of-
most
of
published
course.
composer.
You know, that's the thing. So whose standard are we talking about? And unfortunately, in classical music, there comes a lot of elite baggage and European male white dominance that has formed the canon and all that, you know.
Mhm.
You're living in a very exciting time where it's all bursting at the seams and people realize how one-track things have been. So I think the standard will go this way, like more inclusive.
Mhm.
I don't personally believe there's a standard. I mean, I used to just laugh off John Cage. Now I see how important what his question was. He was questioning what is music, what happens in silence.
Mm.
That's a very profound thing
Or
to
is,
question.
yeah, or is there silence? Because in 433 it's just to listen.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I don't think there's I would never give a definitive answer about some kind of standard, but you know, it's so personal and varied.
I think, you know, that's a dangerous place to go if I'm creating my art and thinking about the standard. And it's hard to not, you know, be judging yourself or evaluating yourself, but if there's like something you're trying to achieve as far as a standard, because this is what's going to be considered great or whatever, I think that's not good for me personally. And often it's the things that I'm so critical of my own work. You know, if that was the case, I had a standard, I wouldn't put anything out there at all. I wouldn't put any recordings out because it's never going to be good enough. And kind of like this morning we talked about, like, when's the piece done? It's like when the deadline is there, or because, you know, I could keep rewriting, and it's not necessarily getting better, it's just getting different. So, yeah, I have to, you know, I think for me, some of the pieces that people seem to like the most are some of the pieces that are like, oh, really? Wow. I didn't think it was very good, but so you never know what's going to be on the other side in the audience or the listeners or the critics.
Mhm. So I think we tend to forget that all those things, the canon, the standard, the very concept of a musical work were created, or the roles of the composer and the performer were created in the 19th century, right? Before that, there were musicians. They improvised, they composed, they played, right? And they usually did that as a job. They were hired by the courts, by the church, and they made music with people who were close to them. In the 19th century, with the Industrial Revolution, we start to see capitalism as it is today, right? The imperialism, right? The colonies, and this everything is thought worldwide. So William Weber is a musicologist here in North America. He has a very interesting, he has a series of books, but especially when he talks about the canon, only in 1870, the canon as we know today was established as an international canon. And that was a collective enterprise building that canon that involved critics, public, performers, and composers. There was a joint effort, right? And no wonder it is comprised today of only male, European, mostly European composers, right? everybody else is in the periphery, right? Like Asia, Latin America, Africa, United States more or less, because of the economic power and the political importance in the world too. So music, that's another thing that emerged by the end of the 18th century and beginning of the 19th century. The concept of absolute music, that music is divorced from everything else. That came with the quest for music's autonomy as an art, divorced from dance, divorced from poetry, great, but not divorced from the world, from politics, from society. We were educated to think music lives in a higher sphere that is not human, that does not belong to society. So I really would like to suggest you read articles by musicologist Tia Denora, and the very important book that was first published in 1992, The Imaginary Museum of Musical Works by Lydia Guillaume. She's a philosopher of music, brilliant one. She explains to us how the concept of a work of music, the work concept, as she calls it, emerged in the 19th century. And it's so prevalent that we say like a Cage 433 is a work of music, it's a musical work, or a Bach cantata is a musical work. No, he wasn't even thinking about that concept. Only composers who came after that, especially the modernists, thought in those terms of creating musical works, right? So, and there was another book by Lydia Guillaume, The Quest for Voice, which is about politics and music, and The Quest for Autonomy, that is from 1998, that is really, really good, where she, chapter 4, pay attention to chapter 4, because she describes two conflicting ideas of performance that were rivaling each other in the 19th century. One was the perfect performance of music, and the other was a perfect musical performance. One was associated with a big symphony hall, with symphony practice, and with the concept, the idea of the Werktreue, the fidelity to the composer, right? And the consequent erasure of the performer's presence and of the performer's body, right? Not to interfere with the music. So the only voice that you hear through when you're playing is the voice of the composer, supposedly, ideally. It's very Platonic concept of a musical work. And the other ideal is associated with salon music and the virtuoso tradition, where it's the very presence and the interaction with the public that creates transcendence. So are two ways of achieving transcendence. Of course, the Werktreue won the war, right? Because that's what we are taught. And the other one is more associated with pop music, right? The more visible the body, the less serious it is, right? The less valuable it is.
Unfortunately, we have to stop.
Sorry,
Because
I could go
we've
forever.
been teaching, and so this is a little bit shorter than usual, so if you're on, I hope you signed up. Well, I think you've been assigned for lessons. So now is teaching time.
Okay, thank you guys.